You're watching Public Comment every Thursdays at 8 a.m. The live stream. Detroit is different and Bridge Detroit. Local politics of Detroit. All right. Welcome back to Public Comment. And inside Public Comment, I'm Khary Frazier of Detroit is Different. This is a show where we cover a lot of the municipal politics of the city of Detroit. It's myself, along with the support of Bridge Detroit and Malachi Barrett, that has a notebook really every week that's covering what's happening in city council. Malachi, how you feeling?
I'm good. Good morning. If you want to learn more about what's going on with city government, go to bridgedetroit.com and subscribe for free to our newsletter. I do the Detroit City Council Notebook, which will get a little bit more frequent in the new year. Right now it comes out once a week, but next year we're going to be having multiple newsletters per week because there's so much news about the city that people need to know about. We're going to bring it to you.
All right. So much more coming in this new year. And some things are like carrying over from 2025, so this year, into 2026. But let's get through this year in review, how we kind of got it laid out to look at and review.
It was a busy year for the city council. We were at every meeting Tuesday morning till Tuesday afternoon. they often run. So I basically put together kind of a list of all the big votes and decisions that that I saw, which basically touched like every corner of life in the city, and we've arranged that into some categories that kind of fit specific themes of topics and interests in the city.
Yep, and as always, we're going to talk a little bit about it. So first things first, you all know city in transition. Mary Sheffield is the mayor-elect of the city of Detroit. So this was so big that we actually took on a whole nother project connecting Detroit is Different and Bridge Detroit, and that was the Detroit Next project, where every mayoral candidate is interviewed. You all can watch it. You all can listen to it. Go to Bridge Detroit, look up Detroit Next, and it was starring Malachi. This was also a year where 7 of the 9 members of city council carry on and are still in council. Some ran even unopposed, but this was a year of some big transitions that I think are just going to shift what's happening politically in the city moving forward. You had the front seat from this with Detroit Next and also everything else that you're doing, and then even working with the other content of Detroit Next. Let's talk a little bit about what the transition and the campaign year was like for the city of Detroit in your perspective, Malachi.
Yeah, so we started off with 9 candidates who ended up on the ballot. There were even more than that, more than a dozen who were throwing their hat in the ring earlier in the year. Mary Sheffield, city council president, now mayor-elect, was the first to jump in and the last one standing. She won in a landslide. Throughout the campaign, throughout the primary, in our interviews with all of the candidates, which I think are still probably worth people's time to go back and watch, because you get a sense of kind of what, the discussion was like, what are it was really a way to identify the problems that we're facing and talk about some different strategies. And we'll see Mary probably pick up some of those ideas and others definitely not. But, there was a lot of discussion, really. The core of the campaign, to me, the core of kind of the election, at least from the candidates, the messaging was, we've been moving in the right direction. Things are improving, but we need to deepen investment in the neighborhoods. It's time to shift focus away from downtown. It's time to re-examine our relationship with tax breaks for large developments. And obviously, we need to improve education and public safety and make Detroit a place where families and businesses can both thrive and kind of shake that balance out more. There's a lot of feeling that, there's been much more attention on the needs of the business community over the needs of the community. And we saw Mayor Sheffield thread that needle pretty well, I think, pretty, effectively in communicating that, like, she's not Mike Duggan 2.0. As someone told me, Mike Duggan in a wig, that's not her. But, she also is kind of an inheritor of the last 10 plus years of work that he has done and that she has done on the city council. So, what exactly are those differences going to look like? I think are going to be key for next year, especially as we'll get into, like the Pistons and the Illiches and the Gilberts of the world have some big things on their agenda, and even the Maroons. But, I think Sheffield was able to identify, the problems with the city, but also make voters trust that she's the person that can really carry that forward. I think that was the big difference that we saw in the general race between her and Pastor Solomon Kinloch. He was really aggressively focusing on poverty in the city, and that it's a disgrace now that 51% of the kids are below the poverty line, and we haven't done enough to move that needle in the right direction. But ultimately, I think he struggled to articulate a real vision and plan. And now we are, in late December. Sheffield's transition team is starting to announce some of their key hires. Her chief of staff, while on the city council, Brian White, is now going to be the deputy mayor. She's kept a campaign promise to retain police chief Todd Bettison. And we're expecting, more hiring announcements in the future. So we haven't yet seen what that 100-day action plan is. And I think a lot of eyes and attention will be on that. The transition team is huge. There's 18 committees focusing on different issues, and close to 230 members from, all kinds of different organizations, smaller grassroots level, all the way up to big businesses. So there's quite a diversity of folks on there. And what does this kind of all coalesce into? Is there going to be, kind of a cohesive plan that comes out of that? I think it's going to be really interesting to see. And we probably will get more on that in the new year. Sheffield is going to be sworn in a private ceremony on New Year's Day, January 1. And then we'll have a more public ceremony the following week. And the city council has been sworn in already and had their orientation in December. So they'll be back at it the first week of January.
Yeah. And also throughout this campaign, there were the city council races. We're looking at Denzel McCampbell in District 7 and Renata Miller in District 5. Those are the new council members. And also we're going to have a new city council president, which I'm sure we're going to get that filled out definitely as the members themselves are voting on that. I'd imagine probably sometime early January. They're probably already having those discussions about it. But
I think that vote is going to be the first thing that they do to decide who's the president and who's the president pro tem. And James Tate, who's been referred to as the dean of the council, he's the longest serving member and was the pro tem when Mayor Sheffield was the council president, has said publicly that he wants to be the president. I think he's probably going to get the support of his colleagues. The council votes itself on who will be the leader of the body. And then in terms of pro tem, I'm not sure. It could be one of the at-large members. I've heard that Coleman Young might want to be pro tem, so I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, we're definitely going to see with that. And as I say, a lot in Detroit Next. I was taking the edits of a lot of that stuff. As Malachi, I would say, was definitely the consistent star of the show. I actually had an interview or two throughout that as well.
It was a team effort. Bryce Huffman got in the mix, Stephen Henry. So definitely go check out the interview with Denzel McCampbell. For anyone that's wondering, what does it mean to have a Democratic Socialist on the council? Well, we got two council members. Santiago Romero is also identifies that way, but in his own words, we talked about what that means, and he's it's interesting. I think a lot of attention will be on those two new members.
You better believe it. All right, and as we continue on here, we're looking at the $3 billion budget, which is already kind of known. I think one of the things I definitely wanted to highlight was that the fiscal year of the city of Detroit is from July 1st to June 30th. Sometimes the way the information is delivered, it feels as if it is the same as the calendar year. Like many other organizations and governments kind of follow the calendar year for the fiscal year, but our fiscal year it's from July to June 30th. So these first 6 months of a Sheffield administration are going to follow what that budget was under a Duggan executive administration, even though she did serve as a city council president. As we know, the legislative duties and executive duties are completely different, but the city council did secure $26 million in some of the changes. And this was a little bit more than what a lot of people expected. And also, as we talk about a little bit more, I do want to highlight that even though we were looking at a 23% voter turnout, that was a little bit more than we expected too. So this 26 million, as I'm bouncing back to that, was definitely looking at funding more to DDOT buses and drivers, and funding bus shelters, $3 million for community violence intervention. We're going to definitely pick up and speak a lot to that. The budget hearings, as I can say, like between what's happening with Outlier, Bridge Detroit, the documenters, a lot of information from those hearing to hearings, and that's going to continue. And that is like the journalism that really is very impactful, as far as like we can tell where the city is actually, you know, as they say, put your money where your mouth is, or more so like this is what we're paying attention to. Some of this that I think stood out that I didn't have highlighted on there was something that's been big, and I don't know if you want to give more perspective of it, of a lot of the home repair that the city was providing, and some of that was tougher just due to the prices of home repair just going up in general, inflation and what's happening with the cost of living. So there are still so many senior residents or residents that definitely, I don't know, I don't like using disabled per se, but differently able folks that are looking for some of those repairs to be present, and that's a lot of the roofs and a lot of the porches. This kind of also impacts like with different things federal. This is like federal kind of connecting the city. That's more of what I want to present, but it was great to see DDOT did get some support. A lot of the transit riders that are activists and advocates around this said that they definitely wanted more, and that's what you'd expect. Malachi, what was your perspective of what was done with the money that was there and available? And what have you heard, especially when it comes to transit riders?
Yeah, if you are interested in the budget process, which you should be, it's your money. This is taxpayer money. So really what we're talking about is like, how is the city spending your money? We every year, through a collaboration with our different nonprofit newsrooms, Khary mentioned Outlier Media and the Detroit Documenters primarily, we get butts and seats and we cover every single committee hearing on the budget, where every department and city office comes before the city council and says, here's what we use our money for. Here's what we'd like to use some money for next year. Give us X amount of dollars and we can get this done. And the council basically uses all of that to craft their changes to the budget to fund their priorities, which, as you mentioned, $26 million in changes, significant. That's a lot of money, right? But in the context of the overall $3 billion budget, it's a really small. I think it's like 1% or so of the actual budget. So council has a lot of, or a limited, very limited control over, the actual spending. Mary Sheffield will present her first budget proposal at the end of March. So that's definitely something to look forward to in the new year, but it won't take effect, like Khary said, until basically mid-year. One important thing to note is we will not have access to ARPA dollars, the American Rescue Plan Act pandemic COVID-19 recovery funding. That expires at the end of 2026. So can kind of be baked into this budget a little bit, but we're not going to be able to rely on it really moving forward. And, when you talk about home repair, that has been the major source of home repair funding for the city. So, we're looking in this budget, how does there can't really be any changes with how the ARPA money will be spent as well. Like that's been kind of locked in for more than a year now. So what will the Sheffield administration do in terms of moving money to fill in, not gaps necessarily, because the ARPA money didn't like prop up parts of the budget. It let us do new things. Which of those new things will maybe carry forward? Where will money maybe be diverted to fund some of those things? I mean, she's talked a lot about maintaining home repair, and the council did shift some actual general fund dollars toward that, but a small amount compared to, the overall amount. But the big public debate this last time around was around DDOT funding. There's been a big push from transit advocates to double the department's budget over the next 5 or so years. The city took a pretty big step toward boosting that budget, but still kind of felt short of what folks, it didn't double the budget. So, we use that money to increase pay for drivers and mechanics, which is a huge step because you need buses to work and you need people to drive them. We also got a federal grant and have invested some money in new buses. So that should also help with getting more reliability and frequency of buses, because we've got, buses that are working in newer and nicer and maybe encouraging people to ride more. And we've also been updating the shelters and the kind of infrastructure around bus stops throughout the city. That is an ongoing process, but I can definitely see the difference on the east side where I live, where those new shelters have come in. So there's still a lot that needs to be done to make the bus system more reliable and maybe better connected. The DDOT reimagined plan is still kind of in limbo, I guess, in my perspective. Like, some things have been moved forward, but the overall goal of like making some of the major routes like every 15 minutes, it seems to be working on Woodward and the Jefferson and some of those other, bigger routes, but I don't think they've really gotten to the full ramp up of that service that's outlined in the plan. So I think that will be an issue that gets a lot of attention from the public. And I mean, transit advocates are probably the loudest group, which is not a negative thing. Like, they're advocating for what they want to see in their city government. And they probably will be again, this year too. So that's definitely something to watch when it comes to the budget.
Yeah, yeah. Another thing to definitely take perspective when it comes to what's happening with DDOT is, and I've uplifted this too, in that group of a lot of people on this transition team, Tiffany Gunter, that runs that's the head of SMART. And one of the biggest challenges well, there are two huge challenges that I think that have been elephants in the room with public transit in the city of Detroit. The first one is that this is the Motor City, so it's you need to have a car, not necessarily take public transportation. That's been a debate that's been here for forever. You know what I'm saying? And then the other one is sometimes what can exist where it's Detroit versus the Metro Detroit area and what that connection can be. The relationship between SMART, meaning that is like more of a regional authority of Metro Detroit, and DDOT, combining the possibilities of what can happen with the working together. Because even those fast lane buses that are like Woodward, Gratiot, Grand River, that's more fluid of routes. And also when it comes to like paying the drivers more or getting more buses and everything, it's kind of like one versus the other. So DDOT will raise, let's just throw out there like, hey, our drivers are getting $35 an hour. And then, then SMART's like, okay, well, then let's give ours $39 an hour and things like that. So the more that I think both could work together and it not necessarily be as like distant as it has been sometimes in the past, will only help what's going to happen with public transportation for everywhere we're here. Because also when it comes to a lot of the jobs, which kind of goes back into the poverty discussion and so many other things, a lot of people that live in Detroit do not work in Detroit, and also kind of vice versa. So I think the stronger of a public transit, especially nowadays, if you are like downtown or something, like, I mean, depending upon the day that an event's happening, if you want to go, I mean, you may be paying $60 to park. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, man, if you could take a bus for there and back for $5, I mean, you're saving $55, or you got another $55 to spend on whatever you're doing, as opposed to a parking space. You know what I'm saying? So I think that is something that we all would support.
Let me just highlight real quick. We're going to talk about the land bank in a minute. But one big thing that happened this year is the council cut the entire subsidy for the land bank. And so the land bank has its own money, but that city subsidy made up a pretty good chunk of their budget. And so as we kind of talk about what the future is going to be, that's something that I'm also looking forward to. Like, will the council again keep that number at zero, or will some subsidy return? And then also, 11, 12 balanced budgets since we've exited bankruptcy. People want to see that continue, obviously, but the retiree protection fund and pensions payments, there's going to be a lot of attention on that. We've got 150 million or so in this rainy day fund budget reserve, and when the budget was passed, there was $455 million in the retiree protection fund. So city officials say that we are healthy and we are able to meet those obligations, but I think there's a lot of skepticism from folks and just a general concern and anxiety about falling into financial hardship, if not bankruptcy. But I don't think we're on the path to bankruptcy just yet.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm going by information that you've reported on and trusting the numbers, but I do know that things do change. And we're kind of right there at that topic. So land development and the question of control, 1 year operating agreement after 2 years without one, and long-term structure is unresolved. This is going to be something to be decided upon in 2026. This was uplifted really through the executive administration and Mayor Duggan speaking to like, look, I think that this needs to be decided upon by what's at hand. That was something from the executive office. And with this being said, like the land bank is certainly, you could, it's like that, you can make a reality show or a television show out of the iterations of the start of it to where it's at now. People's confusion about how it works, what happens with it. It's so many things to be uncovered in a lot of the as you've uplifted in a soon to be released Detroit is Different with Malachi. A lot of the jargon in politics and how things happen are right there in a lot of what was standing in creating the land bank, the accessibility to it, to Detroiters, what it did to people that had properties where certain people couldn't get access to properties. It's so many questions. And also just the state of what's happening in the land bank. It was at one point in time, depending upon like how early it was, I mean, you had an availability, and I personally know people like family members even that have been able to purchase, I guess I don't want to say like white box spaces, but properties that, you know, with minimal repair, you could move into and take that property. Which the other thing that I always think is tied to this is the taxes and the property taxes and what was fair and what was unfair that in that, because a lot of these properties in the land bank are there because of a lot of tax foreclosure. So like, I don't think you can really talk about one without talking about the other. And there are so many people that have been harmed connected to what happened with property tax. This is something that actually council member at the time, well, council president Mary Sheffield was one of the politicians locally that would speak to this and look to programs to make whole. This is also explored in the last Detroit Next episode with Mary Sheffield, so you can look back to that. I see both as very interrelated and very connected, and that's really where I think this discussion starts. Malachi, give us some breakdown.
Yeah, so one number might be the most important thing to keep in mind for the future of this conversation, and that is $2 billion. That is the value that has been generated in property value by the land bank since 2014, according to a new report that came out this week, which we have reporting about on bridgedetroit.com, and you can read through that yourself and decide how legit you feel like that is. But that, I think, is going to be a really important card to play really in the future of the land bank, in saying that, we as, the land bank have had a positive impact on the neighborhoods. And what's interesting about that is the impact of rehabilitating a house. Instead of tearing it down is much greater. So, the difference between the property value impact from a demolition is much lower than, turning that into a house that people can live in. So I think that has policy implications as well moving forward. The land bank put out a 5-year action plan that it tries to address a lot of the criticisms that they have faced over the whole time they've been around, basically. And a lot of that hinges around transparency and accountability, and people feeling like they don't really understand why land is being sold to people who maybe don't live in the neighborhood, why land is being kind of packaged up and held for other development opportunities, who even to talk to when they try to call the land bank with an issue, or if they're in the process of rehabbing a house, who do they call to get a little bit of extra time, because the land bank can take back properties that are not fixed within a certain amount of time, although they try to offer extensions. One positive thing is the report that I'm talking about here, which was commissioned by the land bank. It was a basically like a economic firm. Sorry, I'm having trouble with my words today. Economic firm that has been studying land banks across the country for like the last 20 years. But they found that only 8% of the properties that have been rehabbed go back into tax delinquency, which is that's a low number. That's really good.
Yeah, that's what I think.
The vast majority of houses that are being rehabbed aren't sliding back into like the land bank's control. The big question is though, what happens with vacant land? Because out of the 66,000 or so properties that the land bank still has, 60,000 of that is vacant land. So we're talking about side lots, we're talking about neighborhood lots, we're talking about, you people know what I'm talking about. When you drive around the city, there's a lot of vacant land. So who gets it, and how does the city work that into its master plan is a big question. And the land bank is going to work on an open space plan that will tackle some of that as well. But some of these things are not going to happen next year. It's more in the next like 2 to 5 years. So I think the land bank is well aware that people are frustrated and have a lot of issues with them. I think they are making a good faith effort to address it. People need to hold them accountable for following through on that plan. And a lot of, there's going to be implications for what the council does in terms of funding and what the mayor decides to do in terms of, do we take on some of the responsibilities of this under the housing department? Another big thing, an argument that is made by the land bank and its supporters is that, it has special powers that the city government doesn't have. For example, it can clear outstanding property tax debt so that a new owner doesn't have to take on all that debt when they get the property. They can clear titles quicker. They can basically sidestep some of the process in terms of clearing titles and getting things transferred over. So that's very useful. The city council approves major land transfers from the land bank. I don't know if it would be better for them necessarily to get more involved in approving like every land bank sale, although it would create, a much more easy route for the public to come talk about some of those issues. And I think a lot of the problems with it kind of comes back to this being like a quasi-public agency that, the board is appointed by the mayor. So that's another big responsibility that Sheffield will have, is like putting people in place that will manage the land bank. But because of that, those board meetings they're not happening at the Urban Henderson down at KMAC. They're happening at the land bank headquarters, and they're not as accessible for people. So I think a lot of it just comes back to that, but some of these things are being tweaked, and it's probably, the biggest topic in the city. I mean, everywhere I go, I hear people talk about the land bank.
Yeah, the land bank is definitely one of those things that is consistently explored. Within this, we're also looking at a lot in development that is away. The Riverfront WNBA facility, and also what's happening with the Detroit City, football club stadium as well. And both are just different perspectives of, we're always talking about so much within development and the tax incentives, what's happening, the relationship with community. But the WNBA place, project, it is not past that threshold where they definitely need to have a community benefits agreement. So like a board that does exist there. This is something else that kind of goes into some of the elections, but I'm just more aware of a lot of people in the community advisory councils, and some people made their way onto there. Shout out to Brenda Butler for breaking so much of that down to me. So she's one of the members. Every district has the ability to have one. We do not have one in every district. I'm sure that a lot of movement from a lot of activists will be moving towards that, because a lot of these community benefits agreements and the ordinances, a lot of residents are feeling as though it's not as fair as it should be with how these are executed and what happens. Now, in reference to the WNBA project, as I say, it's like under that threshold where it's necessary, but that project is definitely where I've been to a couple community meetings, just working with other people that I work with in community, and seen some of what's been laid out as far as the relationship it's going to have with, especially like young people and athletics, series of like volleyball courts, and what they're going to do with basketball, and having a relationship with that community to welcome a lot of youth interest, and even schooling, like education on site, and almost an extension of, I don't know if people are familiar with like the Detroit boxing project, but like an extension of something like that into other athletics is what is presented. The people in that community, in that neighborhood, I do still feel as though you should have a community agreement, whether it's necessary or whether not necessary. It's just a sign of good faith, especially when we're looking at anything kind of Pistons related, associated with a lot of what's happened with the Henry Ford deal and the people over there. I think it just shows better faith. As far as when it comes to the Detroit Football Club, it's been mixed reviews. You were going to a lot of those meetings and back and forth, and like looking at a lot of that perspective and what people feel as though is kind of going to be necessary and the impact that that'll have. Many people have uplifted that, like, all right, it's already kind of tougher navigating this space. Both are different projects, but the community benefits agreement, even package that sits now, a lot of activists have said this needs to change. We need to make updates on it and give more power to what that community can do. Malachi, both these projects, but especially the football club project, what's your take and what have you seen as far as a lot of community looking at what these benefits agreements can be and how the community can have more leverage in these discussions?
Yeah, I mean, how effective is the community benefits ordinance at this point? I mean, we've seen several big projects come through that have left residents frustrated with agreements that they feel fell short of what developers could have actually put on the table. The juxtaposition of DCFC going through this process, which is a club that's being privately financed by some folks who are not the Illishes. They don't have access to the same resources versus the WNBA project, both of which I think people think are better uses than the current use of those properties, right? One is the Southwest Hospital that's going to be turned into a soccer stadium. The other is the Uniroyal site on the riverfront, which is vacant and contaminated, and that would be turned into a youth sports complex. So, putting aside that, I think people are generally supportive of the idea of, both of these projects. DCFC had to go through the community benefits process and create a deal for more investments with residents, and the Pistons and WNBA facility did not. And some of that is the way that the ordinance was written. Some of it is, I don't know, I think maybe some selective judgment on behalf of the city in saying that, it's kind of a technicality that allowed the WNBA to avoid the community benefits process. And then, as a result of that, we've seen the Downtown Development Authority just this week approved $5 million to upgrade LCA in public money to accommodate the WNBA coming in. So, we've just have kind of continued to see public investment in some of these things, and there's a lot of questions around what are we getting out of it, besides women's basketball coming back to Detroit and soccer coming to the city. Could there more that could be done there? And we even heard council members themselves say, like Councilmember Santiago Romero, who previously was talking about let's reform the community benefits ordinance. We heard at the end of the year, basically, she said, I don't think this is effective. And I think it's more important maybe to create some kind of tax or way to acquire more, investment and resources to basically get more of a share of the, the ticket revenue or the money that's being made off of these projects. And then the city can use that to invest in, housing or other things like that. So, yeah, I don't know. For a while, we had been kind of having conversations with people about the limitations of the ordinance. It feels like there's a bit of a vibe shift happening where other methods are going to be pursued. A lot of this is difficult work, though. I mean, I don't want to downplay the agreements that were struck because there's some good stuff in there that, will have a positive benefit. But the kind of tension between the city wanting these projects to happen and then the projects requiring public investment and the public saying, well, what are we, we'll scratch your back, but are you going to scratch ours? People have some itchy back still.
Yeah, and the other thing about this too, the way it's usually presented, and Lord knows, I I went to school for marketing and everything, and I guess this is usually how it's going to be presented. But oftentimes, when what's delivered connected to the community benefits agreements are delivered, is packaged as if this is just public good and the organization was going to do this. Is if like we're just, we're just great stewards in community, even though we do business in community, not necessarily really acknowledging what has been provided connected to the tax abatements associated with a lot of these projects, A, and B, what's needed for the community benefits agreements. Now, with that, so much of if you talk to many developers, and actually we've had that, you can check Detroit Next for that, and even other people, the thought process is like the barriers of entry for what happens with business, especially when it comes to building and development in the city of Detroit, are such a, like that barrier of entry is so high that this is necessary because of everything that exists and what's happening with so much of the millages and all of the taxes associated with this. More information, check some more Detroit Next. So I do think that personally it's good to have the agreements and the ordinance on the books, and looking at how it could be refined, but possibly like deciding other ways and other methods. But this is really where I think that community advisory council would be so empowered, because if you kind of just had another body to assist with how things are happening and where these things are happening, especially as a District 5 resident myself, and there's so much happening in District 5, like how we have like a stance and say against multi-billionaires, and sometimes multi-billionaires partnering with one another for projects. What's going to happen? I mean, I even look at what's happening in Southwest with the bridge for so long, and what's just rearrange certain things. I mean, it's some heavy changes in a lot of these communities associated with this. So as we get to kind of in that same place, housing, zoning, neighborhood protection. So it was a zoning overhaul proposed for faster redevelopment of vacant schools, definitely, and a lot of density reforms that are looking at in 2026. Council cited the need for resident education and the impacts of it all, and some truck route restrictions passed in Southwest Detroit connected to public health and safety. I think that all of this, when it comes to a lot that's happening in zoning, and people need to pay attention to what's happening with zoning, but we're looking at those democratic socialists that are on council as far as advocating for and being voices for people, because it's a lot, and we're looking in like noise pollution, what happens with traffic, what's happening with a lot of these truck routes, and just period. And these shifts, sometimes even from outside the city, impact what's inside the city. Because me living over here, like off Davison, I can tell you definitely since the 696, I guess, construction has gone underway, it's completely changed the footprint in my neighborhood. I'm gonna say the past 3 days, it's been deadly car accidents over here, like all associated with what's happening on Davison. One was a chase, so I think people may look at that differently, but still, like, this has happened, but it's all heightened like 3 days in a row. That's like heavy because a lot of these different flows of what's happening in traffic, and this goes into zoning as well. So like how this is happening, where this is happening in zoning, I see, like I said, those democratic socialists definitely being some allies for where community stands when it comes to this. And also when it comes to density, and the elephant in the room of not just in the city of Detroit, but America itself, is affordable housing. And I've actually been told that, stop using that term and start using accessible housing, because affordable is a term that is defined definitely through
affordable to who?
Yeah, exactly.
That's what people say.
Yes.
The zoning stuff is super interesting. So, the biggest kind of piece of this is coming back in the new year, because council basically felt that residents didn't get enough time to understand it and were very concerned about it and didn't quite understand the impact. I think council members themselves didn't quite understand the impact. A So they did loosen some restrictions to speed up development of vacant schools and public libraries and like older kind of utility government buildings that are in the middle of neighborhoods, but because of their zoning, it's very difficult to turn them into like housing or even, like a restaurant with lofts on top and things like that. So that was successful. But amendments that would basically allow more housing density in residential districts, specifically R2, which makes up a pretty large amount of the zoning districts in the city. That's the one that's going to come back. It's called Let's Build More Housing. So you can see the intent there. But, there's always tension around bringing new housing in and who's it affordable for and how is this going to impact the character of the neighborhood and the people that live there. I mean, we've been seeing these debates all over the place. So there is definitely going to be some opposition to this just out of general concern that it's going to make the neighborhoods less affordable for people that have been holding it down there. And I think the city is going to have to find a way to address that concern, really, if this is going to be successful, because council members are very hesitant to do anything that would make it harder for longtime residents to stay where they're at.
Oh, definitely. All right, and we getting closer to the end. This is the last slide before. I think we got two more, but public safety is always going to be a topic anytime you talk about anything in I think probably urban America. But there was a body cam ordinance that passed. This was from the desk of Angela Whitfield Calloway about the 30-day release after shooting / serious harm. Exceptions raised about like what the when that's not necessarily necessary, connected to what that investigation is. We're going to stop here for a second because this was something that has been heightened by, like, there are a couple coalitions of people that are strongly advocating for a lot more transparency when it comes to what's happening between police and citizens and these incidents, and getting access to what's happening with the body cam footage. And with this, a lot of the transparency that's needed and what can stop things and when do you get access to it, big discussions. This definitely lies at the feet of what's happening with the police commission, which there are new police commissioners as well this year. So looking forward with what will happen with this, as like, I think this is going to be a starting point. Some of the organizers feel like they could have been more involved in these discussions. I believe that the office that delivered this was thinking more so like, okay, we've had these discussions there, so let's make sure that it could work and what could be equitable. This was this is later in the year, but something that is, I think, many residents were speaking about this and raised a lot of attention. Malachi, break it down.
There's been some really great reporting in the Detroit Free Press about how police are shooting people after chasing them or trying to pull them over for assuming they have a weapon. And so what happens in those interactions is extremely important for people to know. There's been a lot of attention at the Board of Police Commissioners about releasing body cam footage when incidents occur, when there's police shootings. And there's not been very much success in getting access to that tape. Sometimes it's been edited. Definitely go look at some of the Free Press reporting on that. It breaks it down really well. So this ordinance for the body cams, I think, is important in creating, a actual process around releasing this footage. I think there's some valid concern around the loopholes and the roadblocks that police and prosecutors can still put up. When it comes to getting timely access, they can request delays, they can block footage if it would interfere with an investigation. So you can imagine that will apply to a lot of cases. But this is certainly better than nothing. I understand, that was kind of the main point that Calloway was making when there was some frustration and pushback from police accountability groups that felt pretty outside this process. While the police chief and the county prosecutor were at the table in the drafting of this language, those advocates were not, and ultimately they couldn't endorse what was passed. But Callaway said, "Look, this is legislation that could be changed and updated over time, and we're going to see how this works, and we're gonna test it over a period of time, and then we can see what actually issues, need to continue to be tweaked. And I think she's committed to doing that. I don't get the sense at all that this was like a one and done thing. Certainly not when there's so much public attention on it and there's so much demand for more accountability and attention on the Board of Police Commissioners. I think this was a big topic in those elections as well. So, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And kind of connected, I wanted to highlight that. The other big story this year, and shout out to my homie, Dr. Yusuf Bunchy Shakur, that leads the Michigan Roundtable for Just Communities. I think he wrote a great editorial about the youth curfew enforcement that has changed, which was something that still kind of floors me, about higher fines for the parents of the young people. Jail was removed, education courses also added. This is just kind of tough as far as, I think, using already what's been uplifted as like scarce resources that we have for police officers throughout the city of Detroit to now like put like, I guess, more attention on stopping, teenagers. It just, I don't know. I just necessarily think that this is, I don't think this is the best use of police officers. And what this kind of goes to as, I just think that more could be used in a more effective way of building those bonds, especially when a lot of the recreation centers still aren't necessarily having a lot of the late hours that they did have. I mean, this is kind of going, and then like, what's the access of like recreation centers and things that young people could get access to and have access to? This is where I do believe the relationship where people talk about what the city of Detroit's politics can have a relationship with the DPSCD and also the other schools. And I'm looking at charter and even homeschools for resources for young people. I think you can be a little bit more constructive and productive about this and not necessarily so much penalizing a lot of parents that, if your kid is 13 and they're probably out at like 9:30, you may be working a late shift or something. Like, I don't know. This was a heavy one. I believe more can be done in a constructive space. I don't know if you want to add on this, but that's kind of a Khary Frazier perspective, and I do believe more talks will happen in reference to that.
I'll co-sign that. I don't have kids, so it's this is a complex thing, and the city, I think, is struggling to legislate a solution here when so much of it is going to kind of depend on things that happen in the home and kind of outside the government's control. And so, yeah, I think being more punitive is something that leaves a lot of people wary of like whether that will actually create the outcome that we want, which is, kids being safer.
Yeah, definitely. You uplifted Chief Bedison is staying on, and he was officially confirmed this year, and it looks like will carry on as the police chief throughout the Sheffield administration. Marijuana and vape ads banned near youth spaces. Also, nicotine products banned in stadiums. That is, it's kind of like that's been happening nationally, but that was something also that kind of touched on. Like, I remember one of the people saying like, "Hey, you know what I'm saying? I'm chewing tobacco, and what's happening here?" So like, this is something that definitely only baseball people would kind of pay attention to.
Yeah.
And go Tigers. Accountability, justice, and repair. The city ombudsman, Sherry. Actually, we're going to have a special Detroit is Different very soon. That's going to air. We went to her office and we kind of really opened up about more so like her perspective of getting that office more engaged throughout community where people can touch it. Great work has been done there. The office presents itself post-rebellion as a space and place for community to look at what's happening in city and touch base. A lot of the things that really people reach out to city council are like ombudsman things that could be reached out to. So we're looking for that. City also stepping into prosecuting misdemeanors starting next year in 2026. This was already kind of on the books, but like uplifted more. This is another one of those things where I'm always considering capacity and what do we have the capacity for. the legal office of the city of Detroit and what that will look like. I know this first 6 months we're still looking at what's kind of in place for budget, but I'm very interested in seeing what lead counsel for the city of Detroit will look like in the Sheffield administration and the relationship with these misdemeanors. This was something uplifted. Like Kim Worthy's like, okay, if the city can take this on, then it can help the county look at prosecuting, I guess, what is looked at as like higher crimes and adjusting to that. This is, I don't know if the city has the resources for that per se. You know what I mean?
Yeah, we're going to have to really see how that's going to work. It starts in 2026, and I don't think we got a whole lot of detail on how this is going to work.
Yeah.
Basically. Do we have enough attorneys? What this is not going to make money for the city. Apparently, we're going to basically be like cost neutral at best. And yeah, I mean, is this going to result? A lot of it was let's clear up the plate of the county prosecutor so that they can deal on more violent crimes and take some of the smaller stuff and push it over to the city.
Yeah, which actually goes back to something that many activists speak to. And actually, I may need to do a Detroit is Different creative like video essay on it. But Recorder's Court, the city of Detroit had a court, Recorder's Court, and that is a space and place that so many people uplifted as a more just place of engaging with citizens.
We're going to talk about the reparations task force, but that was one major thing that they identified as a harm that was inflicted on the city by getting rid of that court, exactly because of what you're saying. Yeah. So I don't know, maybe it will result in better outcomes for people. I don't know.
I mean, we're looking at this being prosecuted for, but that's definitely something more to explore that I may uplift myself, because many of I say the elders or the OGs speak about this all the time, and it was kind of going right into the reparations report. You said it best, and it's definitely some OGs and elders on that definitely uplifted many of the harms, and also many recommendations as well. The task force delivered this action. It was like right as the election right as the vote to like the runoff between
October 31st is when it came out. So yeah, basically like a couple, like 4 days before the election, and right as the city council ended its business for the year. So this kind of came out a little quietly, but it is available online. There should be more public discussions and a briefing at the city council in January. So I'm hoping people have more of an opportunity to hear directly from the task force about their approach and what's in it. Because I think there's a lot of stuff, the recommendations, there's about 100 of them I counted. And, notably there's recommendations for, direct cash payments to descendants of African slaves. But also there's, housing grants, there's free skilled trades programs, there's recommendations that kind of span things that we're already doing at the city, some of which is, funded by pandemic relief dollars that won't be there for much longer. So we're in kind of jeopardy. Things that, the task force is calling for increased investment in. So, increasing the amount of a home repair grant, for example. And then there's things that are maybe more legally dubious in terms of like, can the city actually accomplish this? Does it have the authority to do this? And there's a lot in there. And now that the task force has basically finished its work, it's disbanding at the end of this year. Their business is done. That group will no longer be really around. And so whose responsibility is it to carry this forward? It's going to fall on the new mayor, who played a pretty prominent role in getting this effort, moving forward, and the city council. And so, yeah, who's going to be the champion of reparations moving forward now that the task force is going away is a big question.
Yeah, one of the recommendations was also office that stands. So that definitely goes into things. Indigenous burial mound returned to a tribe this year as well when we look at justice and repair. And we close out with economic justice and future ahead. So this was one of the biggest things that many people applauded that are in the business sector, where like a lot of the 1-year licenses will now be 2-year licenses, and reduction of a lot of the duplicate fees that are associated with that, as the barriers of entry for business here in the city of Detroit, as I just spoke about that, even in that lens of what's happening for development, but even in just conducting business of where the steps are and consolidating what that looks like. Mary Sheffield spoke a little to this. I do believe more will be opened up on this, especially looking at some of the people that are on that transition team, knowing their relationship with business and what's present for a lot of the small businesses versus larger businesses. I do think that there's going to be some traction there. Solar farms approved in 2 more neighborhoods. You all know my stance on that one. But, it's been definitely moving forward with a lot of the solar farms. I personally still feel as though, like, if you're going to have a solar farm in your community and it's connected to our government, you should have access to that power, like, at no cost. I think that something needs to be provided as a general good for the residents that are there. When we look at the neighborhoods where they're especially taking it, there is some eminent domain. That's how I'm looking at it, because though people are offered, even if your property is lower than it, 80,000 or double whatever your property is worth, a lot of these houses and that housing stock has been uplifted by a lot of the developers. Like these 2-family flats or 4-family flats that some Detroiters have access to, you just never, well, you never, but the it's been hiding that, like, the process of building something like what's happening in some of the Detroit's historic housing stock to rebuild something like that in today's era would be, I don't want to say impossible, but definitely not the most reasonable and equitable way of looking at development. So that's why that kind of weighs on me a little bit. And you still don't necessarily get access to that solar power if you live there. And a lot more land acquisition definitely took place when it comes to those projects. Community violence intervention expanded. Now, this is something that is big time applauded, as the shot stoppers have been some very effective ways of looking at what's happening when it comes to preventing a lot of violence in communities. Todd Bettison has been somebody that has championed and cheered this on, like, even from his other position under, like, in the mayor's administration over to being the police chief, and also just looking at those transitions. I know that Alea Harvey Quinn just had a recent celebration of her work with Force Detroit, the leadership of Zoe. Zoe's definitely been present in Bridge Detroit, but just in community, period, and many others. What's happened with New Era Detroit and Zeke. This has been a constructive way of looking at engaging community to not necessarily criminalize a lot of the residents here in the city of Detroit and what's moving forward with that. So seeing that CVI is invested in, and also our mayor, our mayor-elect, Mary Sheffield, has been big in supporting this act as well. This has even gone into, like, up to Lansing. It's gotten some state support. So big applause of what has moved forward with that. And Mayor Duggan's administration obviously presenting this and actually investing more in it throughout his tenure. That's what I got for CVI. What you got to add to, like, kind of like that wrap up?
Yeah, I mean, I think you summarized that well. I guess the only thing I want to highlight is the University of Michigan has been studying the effectiveness of the CVI groups. So we've definitely seen a numeric decrease in shootings that have happened in the areas where these groups are working. So that's a positive sign. But what's the causality and what is, like, the overall impact? Are there other ways that maybe we could better understand the impact rather than just, like, the number going up or down? I think that is going to have a lot of implication for future funding and what happens with this. I mean, right now it's a success story, and the city is, advocated at the legislature to get more investment from the state, put some of its own funding in it to keep it going long term. But I think that's just going to continue to be something that advocates are going to have to push for, unfortunately, and getting more long term funding. And getting a clearer picture of exactly how it works, I think, is going to be helpful too, because there's a lot of different organizations and some new ones that are getting to this work, and some of them are, probably better at this work than others. So what can we learn from the successes, and what can we learn from the failures? that is still an ongoing process.
Yes. So definitely, this has been so much more of an experience. We also had Tamesa. Shout out to Tamesa Bailey. She's in Georgia right now, doing some of the political work there. But we're gonna pick back up, and we'll have more with this public comment. Thank you, Malachi, for working with everything Detroit is different this year, and offering so much of that information and sharing what you do with the notebook with the people, and that commitment. And I definitely see more. We're gonna bring on some more guests and other things moving forward with public comment. This has been a great experience, even for me, like keeping me on my toes of what's happening politically throughout the city of Detroit with municipal politics. And I'm grateful that you all are watching. It's been, especially like at some of the campaign spaces and places, I was bumping into people, candidates, and just everything. They're like, man, you was the one telling me about that. I'm like, oh man, you was watching that. Look at me ranting and raving. I want to be cussing and carrying on, as they say, but keeping everything going, man. So we definitely, this is our 2025 year in review, but 2026 is right around the corner. And even before that, you get like a special Detroit is Different, where you get some of that background of Malachi, even though I think it starts there. And then it's like a whole discussion of where media and news kind of stand out. Even better for you to get more perspective of it. Malachi, tell the people what's up.
Yeah, that was fun to come on Detroit is Different. I think I mostly avoided crashing out about the state of the media, but it's that's that gives me a lot of concern.
That was pre Trump's Rob Reiner tweet. I'm just
yeah. Oh man, well, it gets crazier every day out here. So right. But man, yeah, looking back over that list that we just put together, and that's not even everything that we've covered. It's kind of amazing the amount of work we were able to do in bringing this information to light. So I hope that it is useful. I know it's still not enough. I know there's not enough coverage of things that are happening, not enough like deep analysis and holding people accountable and following up and really pushing. So I appreciate people that have been following along in this journey that we're on. I think we're getting better at it as we move forward and getting better at focusing on what matters most for folks. But this is a big election year, and we were kind of pulled in a lot of different directions. So I think next year, even though there will be more elections, there's always another MFing election around the corner. I'm excited to dig deeper into the new administration and the new city council next year. And I think we've set a good foundation to do that. So definitely check us out, bridgedetroit.com. We're your nonprofit newsroom covering issues that matter in the city. Would appreciate a donation if you are feeling charitable in this holiday season. But big thanks to Khary and Detroit is Different for being partners with us in this platform and helping us reach more folks through the audio visual world.
Yes, definitely. With that being said, I want to say peace to you all. You're watching Public Comment every Thursdays at 8 a.m. The live stream. Detroit is Different in Bridge Detroit. Local politics of Detroit.